The blood was already on my lip before I understood what had happened. 1 second I was standing 2 steps behind Ambassador Laura Holt, watching her extend her hand toward the Vorath delegation leader. The next second, something hard and scaled connected with the side of my face and sent me into the wall. The impact rattled my back teeth. The wall was cold. The floor came up fast. I caught myself on both palms, knees hitting the polished corridor surface with a crack that echoed. The corridor outside the grand reception hall of the conclave station was supposed to be neutral ground. Every species that walked these halls knew that. It was written into the founding charter of the conclave of 19 worlds, etched into the entrance arch in 42 languages, repeated in the orientation briefing every diplomat and escort received before docking. Neutral ground, sacred ground. I am Corporal Mara Voss, United Earth Federation, Diplomatic Escort Division. I had been on this station for 11 hours. I had not yet eaten dinner. Laura had not screamed. That was the first thing I noticed when my head cleared enough to process what was around me. She was standing very still, her hand still half raised from the abandoned handshake, her eyes fixed on the 3 Vorath soldiers, who now positioned themselves between her and the corridor exit. The delegation leader, a tall creature with ridged shoulders and amber eyes the size of my fist, was watching me get up from the floor with an expression I could not read. His kind had 7 distinct facial muscle groups that did not map to anything human. For all I knew, he was laughing. The station lights were blue-white. Everything in this corridor was designed to be beautiful, to make visiting species feel the weight and dignity of the conclave. The floors were some kind of composite stone that shimmered when you walked on. The wall panels had artwork inlaid in precious metals from a dozen star systems. There were 3 security cameras mounted at the corridor junctions, and I knew with absolute certainty that every one of them was recording. I stood up slowly. I did not reach for the sidearm on my hip. That was a deliberate choice, and it cost me something to make it, because every trained instinct I had was screaming at me to do otherwise. But I had been briefed very carefully before this mission. Ambassador Holt had sat across from me in a small office on Earth Station 1 and spoken clearly. "If something happens out there," she had said, "your first job is not to respond. Your first job is to remember. Remember everything, every detail, because what you see may matter more than anything you could do about it in the moment." I had nodded and thought I understood. Standing in that corridor with blood filling the gap between my lower lip and my teeth, I understood it differently. The Vorath delegation leader spoke. The translation unit clipped to my collar rendered his words in flat, clean English about 2 seconds after his mouth stopped moving. "The animals stood in my path," he said. Laura turned to look at him. Her face was completely calm. She was 44 years old, had spent 19 years in diplomatic service, had negotiated resource treaties with 4 different alien civilizations, and had once talked a separatist government down from launching a strike on a civilian orbital. She looked at the Vorath leader the way you look at a weather forecast that confirms what you already expected. "I see," she said. That was all she said. She turned back to me, checked my face with a brief clinical look, and touched my arm once. "With me," she said quietly. We walked back toward the reception hall entrance. The 3 Vorath soldiers did not stop us. The delegation leader did not speak again. As we reached the doors, I heard the sound of the reception hall on the other side. 100 voices from 40 species, all talking, eating, greeting one another in the slow ceremonial way that diplomacy required. Laura pushed the doors open and walked in as if nothing had happened. I followed her. The first person to notice us was a Keldan counselor named Arvin, who was standing near the entrance with a glass of something amber and fizzing in one of his 4 hands. He was tall, pale blue, with large dark eyes that processed light differently from humans and often seemed to be looking at 2 things at once. He looked at my face. He looked at Laura. Something moved behind his eyes. "Ambassador," he said carefully. "Counselor Arvin," Laura said warmly, as if she had just arrived. "I was hoping to speak with you about the 3rd agenda item tomorrow." I stood at her shoulder and said nothing. I could taste the blood. I kept my hands loose at my sides and my face as neutral as I could manage. Over the next 2 hours, I watched 7 different species representatives notice the mark on my face. None of them asked about it directly. The Velhari cluster diplomat, a small creature who communicated primarily through color shifts in her translucent skin, turned an odd shade of pale gray when she glanced at me and then quickly looked away. 2 members of the Dothian trade delegation stopped their conversation entirely as we passed and watched us with their compound eyes until we were out of their line of sight. The Vorath delegation entered the reception hall 40 minutes after we did. The leader moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a species that had been part of the conclave for 600 years. He collected food from the serving tables. He spoke with the Pelthian representative. He did not look at us once. I watched him. I memorized his face. which was not a difficult task because Vorath faces were unlike anything else in the known galaxy. The ridge pattern across his brow was unique to individuals, like a fingerprint. His left shoulder bore a rank insignia that I had already looked up in my mission database. Commander level. Senior enough to have made the decision in that corridor himself, without needing to consult anyone. At the end of the evening, when the reception was breaking up and delegations were filing toward their respective station quarters, Counselor Arvin found us again. He waited until we were briefly away from other ears, then leaned down to Laura with his voice very low. "Ambassador Holt," he said, "what happened in the corridor will not go unaddressed. The compact requires a formal response. I want you to know that several member species will support a full tribunal." Laura looked up at him with a polite smile. "Thank you, Counselor. That is very kind." "You will file the complaint?" he asked. She paused just long enough for the pause to mean something. "I will be in contact with my government tonight," she said. Arvin looked at her for a long moment, then at me. He was very still for a creature with 4 limbs. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "the compact exists to prevent exactly this kind of incident, but it only functions when it is invoked. If you do not invoke it—" "Good night, Counselor," Laura said pleasantly. He straightened, looked at us both once more, nodded slowly and moved away. I waited until we were inside our secured quarters with the door sealed and the privacy screen on before I said anything. Laura was already at the comm terminal, and the screen was glowing with a priority connection request from Earth Station 1 that must have been waiting for hours. "Ambassador," I said. She looked up. "Are we going to invoke the compact?" She studied me for a moment. Her expression was thoughtful, not cold, but there was something in it that told me the answer before she said anything. "Get your face looked at," she said. "The medkit is in the second cabinet. Sleep when you can. Tomorrow will be a long day." She turned back to the terminal and opened the connection. I stood there for another second, then went to find the medkit. As I pressed the seal strip over the split in my lip, I could hear the soft sound of her voice behind me, speaking to someone on Earth in tones too low to make out. The words did not matter, yet I knew, the way you know things in your body before your mind catches up, that whatever was being decided in that quiet conversation was going to be the kind of decision that changes things. I sat on the edge of my bunk and looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my own comm unit. The mark on my face was already purpling around the edges. It would be ugly tomorrow. Good, I thought, let everyone see it. I did not sleep well. Not because of the pain, though the pain was there, a dull, persistent reminder that I had been knocked into a wall by something 3 times my mass. I did not sleep well because I kept thinking about the corridor, about the way the Vorath leader had said animal, not with anger, not even with contempt, exactly, with the easy certainty of someone stating a fact they have never once had reason to question. The station hummed around me in the dark. Somewhere beyond the hull were the stars, and between the stars were the ships of 19 civilizations, all of them traveling under the protection of the sacred compact, all of them operating within rules that had held the peace of this region of the galaxy for longer than humanity had known how to write. The compact had one absolute rule, one line that no member species could cross, regardless of provocation, politics, history, or grievance. You did not commit unprovoked physical harm against a sapient being, not on neutral ground, not anywhere, not ever. The penalty was collective condemnation, economic isolation, and in extreme cases, the full military response of every other compact member. 600 years without a major war. That was what the rule had bought the conclave. 600 years of arguments, of tribunal after tribunal, of fines and sanctions and diplomatic crises, but no war, no mass casualties, no civilizations burned out of existence. The Vorath had broken the rule. They had broken it in a monitored corridor in front of security cameras, and the target had been a human woman, and I was fairly sure they had done it because they genuinely believed it did not count. I thought about that for a long time in the dark. The hum of the station changed pitch slightly, the way it did when a large vessel docked or undocked somewhere on the outer ring. I listened to it and breathed and tried not to think about the look on the Vorath leader's face. Not anger, not malice, certainty. That was the part that stayed with me, not the impact, not the floor rushing up, not even the blood, the certainty, the absolute, ancient, untroubled certainty that what he had done did not matter. I closed my eyes. I thought, you have no idea what you just started. Then I slept. The morning after, Laura Holt ate breakfast as if it were any other morning. She had coffee, which she had brought from Earth in a sealed personal supply, because station coffee tasted like recycled engine water, and she had 2 pieces of dry toast, and she read through the day's briefing documents on her tablet, with the careful attention of someone who was not rattled, had never been rattled, and intended to remain unrattled indefinitely. I sat across from her and ate something the station kitchen had generated that it called scrambled eggs, and that bore a distant philosophical, resemblance to scrambled eggs if you did not think too hard about it. My lip had stiffened overnight. It looked worse than it felt, which I had decided was exactly the right arrangement. The conclave has called an emergency procedural session this morning, Laura said, not looking up from her tablet. The Keldan have formally requested it. 4 other species co-signed the request overnight. About yesterday, I said. About a potential compact violation, yes. She turned a page. We have been invited to attend as observers, not as complainants. We are not members of the compact, she said, with the same tone she might use to note that it was raining outside. We attend as observers or not at all. I thought about Arvin's face the night before. The careful, worried look in his large dark eyes. He's scared, I said. Laura glanced up. Arvin? All of them. They want us to invoke the compact because that means the whole thing runs through the compact's framework, tribunal verdict, punishment, tidy, contained. I paused. If we don't invoke it, what happens? She set down her tablet. She looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her before, or maybe had not been paying close enough attention to recognize. It was the expression of someone who has already done all the thinking and arrived somewhere, and is now deciding how much to share. Nothing happens, she said. If we don't invoke it, and we are not members, then under the compact's own charter, the incident is officially unaddressed. The Vorath face no formal consequence. The other member species can express displeasure, can censure, can make noise. But the mechanism only moves if the injured party activates it. I put down my fork. And if the injured party doesn't exist, according to the rules, she said nothing. They hit me, I said, because they think we don't count. And now they're going to get away with it because we don't have standing under their law. Laura picked up her tablet again. Drink your coffee, she said. The session starts in 40 minutes. The procedural session was held in the conclave's secondary deliberation chamber, a wide circular room with tiered seating arranged around a central floor. The acoustics were designed so that anyone speaking from the floor could be heard clearly at any point in the room without amplification, which was impressive and also slightly unsettling. Every word landed with a clean, exposed clarity. There was nowhere to mumble. 14 of the 19 compact species were represented. The Vorath delegation occupied a block of seats in the upper tier, and the delegation leader, whose name the translation unit rendered as Commander Thress, sat with his arms folded and his ridge-marked face aimed at the center of the room with a patience that read as contempt. I sat in the observer section with Laura and our 2 support staff and watched the session begin. Arvin, as the requesting party, spoke first. His voice was measured, but his body language, which I had spent the last 11 hours studying in a crash course from the mission database, was taut. The color along his neck and upper arms had shifted slightly toward a deeper blue, which according to the database indicated stress. He laid out the incident precisely. Time, location, the identities of those involved, the actions taken. He had clearly watched the security footage, because his account was exact. He did not editorialize. He stated that the footage would be submitted to the record. Then he said something that made the room go quiet. Under the compact's charter, the path to tribunal requires a formal complaint from the injured party. The United Earth Federation has been invited to submit that complaint. As of this morning, they have not done so. He paused. We are asking the conclave to consider whether there is a pathway to action in the absence of such a complaint. The Dothian representative spoke next. A long, clicking argument about precedent. I did not follow all of it, but the shape of it was clear. There were other cases where the injured party had been unable or unwilling to file. Were there mechanisms? The answer, from the procedural advocate who spoke next, was technically yes, but they were ancient provisions designed for situations where a party had been rendered incapable of response, not situations where a party had simply chosen not to respond. A smaller species representative whom I did not recognize stood and said something in a high, rapid tone. The translation took a moment. Perhaps they do not know they have the right, the voice in my collar said. Perhaps the humans are simply unaware of the process. Arvin looked directly at our observer section. I informed Ambassador Holt personally last night, he said. She was fully aware. Every face in the room, across every species present, turned to look at Laura. She met the gaze of the room with the same pleasantness she had shown at the reception the night before. She nodded once, in polite acknowledgement of being noticed. She did not stand, she did not speak. She was an observer, and she was observing. The session went on for another hour. The Vorath delegation said very little. Commander Thress spoke once, briefly, to note that the question of whether the incident even constituted a compact violation was itself unresolved, given what he called the ambiguous sapience classification of the species involved. His translation unit rendered the words cleanly. The room was very quiet after he said them. I kept my face neutral. I was getting better at that. After the session, Arvin found us in the corridor. He did not look well. The blue along his neck was deeper than before. Ambassador, he said, please. Help me understand what is happening here. Laura looked at him with genuine warmth. She liked Arvin. I had been able to tell that from the first hour, and I thought the feeling was mutual in whatever way it could be across the gap of biology and history. You've been very kind to us since we arrived, she said. Ambassador, what is Earth planning? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Counselor, the compact is a beautiful thing. 600 years. I mean that genuinely. What your predecessors built here is one of the great achievements in the history of sentient life. But, he said. She smiled. It was a real smile and a sad one. We're not members, she said. He stared at her. I know that. I am asking. That's the entire answer, she said gently. We are not members, which means the compact's protections do not apply to us. But Counselor, she added, and something shifted slightly in her voice. Something that made the hair on my arms prickle without me being able to say exactly why. It also means the compact's restrictions do not apply to us. She let that sit in the air between them. Arvin was very still. Get your people somewhere safe, she said quietly. Not because you are in danger. You are not. But what comes next will be difficult to watch, and I would rather you watched it from a place of stability. She nodded to him once, turned, and walked away down the corridor. I followed. I heard Arvin behind us, not moving, not speaking. We were back in our quarters within the hour. I stood by the viewport while Laura composed a message at the terminal. The message was short. I did not see the content, but it took her less than 4 minutes to write. And when she sent it, she sat back in her chair and looked out the viewport at the stars. Are we leaving? I asked. Tomorrow morning, she said. We will attend the second scheduled session today as planned. Complete the formal farewell protocols and nothing rushed, nothing that looks like retreat. It's not retreat, I said. No, she agreed, it is not. What do I tell the team? Tell them to pack tonight. Tell them to sleep if they can. She paused. Tell them they did well. I thought about the session this morning. About the Vorath representative's voice coming through my collar in clean, flat translation, ambiguous sapience classification. I thought about Commander Thress sitting in the upper tier with his arms folded, unbothered. 600 years of being untouchable had a texture to it. You could see it in the way he sat. The weight of all those unchallenged years, pressing through his posture. He thinks it's over, I said. Laura, quiet for a moment. He thinks he swatted a fly, she said. And now the fly is leaving, and that will be the end of it. I looked out at the stars. Somewhere between here and Earth, signals were moving at the speed of light, carrying words that had already been sent. Already, somewhere. People were reading those words and beginning to make plans. Ambassador, I said. She looked at me. Is it going to be loud? I asked. What comes next? She considered that for a long moment. No, she said finally. That's the thing they will not expect. It is going to be very, very quiet. She turned back to her terminal. I stayed at the viewport, outside, in the vast dark between the Conclave station and the edge of Vorath space. The stars were perfectly still, the way things are still before they move. We left the next morning as planned. No rush, no visible tension. Laura completed every farewell protocol with grace and precision, shook every appropriate hand, exchanged every appropriate courtesy. She was remarkable to watch. The perfect picture of a diplomat concluding a routine visit. I walked behind her the whole way to the docking ring. When we passed through the corridor where it had happened, I did not look at the wall I had hit. I looked straight ahead. My lip was purple and swollen, and visible to everyone who looked at me, which was everyone. Commander Thress was not there to see us leave. His delegation was elsewhere on the station. Someone else, a junior Vorath attaché, watched us board from across the docking bay with an expression I recognized this time. It was not uncertainty, it was relief. He thought it was over too. I stepped through the airlock into our ship. The hatch sealed behind me with a soft final sound. I went to my bunk, lay down, and stared at the ceiling while the docking clamps released, and the engines brought us around and the station dropped away behind us. My comm unit buzzed once. A message from an Earth address I did not recognize, routed through the diplomatic channel. It was 4 words. We have the signal. I read it twice, put the unit down, closed my eyes. I thought about Arvin's face. About his voice saying, help me understand what is happening here. About the careful, good faith fear of a being who had spent his entire career trusting that the rules held. I hoped he had listened to Laura. I hoped he had moved his people somewhere stable, somewhere they could watch what came next without being caught in the middle of it. I thought, this is going to change everything. I thought, they should have checked whether the fly was a fly. Then I thought about nothing for a while, because I was finally tired enough to actually sleep, and when I woke up we were already 3 hours into open space, running dark, running quiet, with the stars ahead of us, and the Conclave station a point of light that was getting smaller by the minute. Whatever had just begun, it had begun without a single raised voice, without a declaration, without a threat. Just a woman with a split lip walking onto a ship and leaving. Sometimes that is the loudest thing in the world. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Admiral Colin Rowe's briefing room on Earth Station 7 when the lights went from white to amber and a junior officer knocked twice on the door and said, "We have authorization, sir." Colin did not smile. He did not stand up from his chair or raise his fist or say anything inspirational. He picked up the single sheet of printed authorization that the junior officer slid through the door, read it once, folded it once, and placed it in the left breast pocket of his uniform jacket. "Tell navigation to plot the jump," he said. The junior officer left. Colin looked around the table at the 8 officers seated there, including me. I had been reassigned to his staff 6 days earlier. I had not been told why until that morning, when he had sat me down and explained that my testimony was going to be needed, and that proximity would make the process cleaner. "Here is what we are doing," Colin said. "We are conducting a law enforcement action under the United Earth Federation's Interstellar Jurisdiction Charter, Sections 4 through 11. We are not at war. We are not invading. We are pursuing named individuals who committed an offense against a UEF citizen and who subsequently declined to present themselves for legal proceedings. Any questions about the legal framework should be directed to the legal team on Deck 6. Any questions about the tactical framework should be directed to me. Are we clear?" We were clear. The UEF Third Response Fleet was not the largest fleet Earth had ever assembled. It was not the most decorated or the most celebrated. It was known, in the quiet circles where these things were discussed, as the fleet that got results in complicated situations. 14 vessels. The flagship was the Connaught, a carrier-class ship that was 13 years old and had never fired a weapon at another vessel in combat, because in every situation where it had been deployed, the other party had chosen to stand down before things reached that point. I had read that detail in the mission briefing and thought about it for a long time. We jumped 4 days later. I stood on the observation deck of the Connaught and watched the stars rearrange themselves around us as we came out of the jump at the edge of Vorath territorial space, and for a few seconds the view was so perfectly still and cold and absolute that it was almost impossible to believe that anything violent had ever happened or could ever happen in a universe this beautiful. Then the proximity alerts started sounding, and the deck beneath my feet shifted as the fleet moved to formation, and I went to find my station. The Vorath response came within 40 minutes, faster than our analysts had predicted, which told me their early warning systems were better than the intelligence files suggested. A fleet of 23 vessels, their configuration a mix of heavier warships and faster interceptors, emerged from Vorath space in a spread pattern that was clearly designed for aggressive engagement. I was in the secondary command room with the legal team when the first communication came through. The Vorath fleet commander's image appeared on the screen, his ridge-marked face familiar in the way that all Vorath faces were starting to feel familiar to me. His rank insignia was higher than Thres's had been on the station. He spoke for 30 seconds. The translation read, "You have entered space under the protection of the Vorath Confederation. This constitutes an act of aggression under the terms of the Conclave Compact. Stand down and withdraw or you will be engaged." Colin Rowe responded from the main bridge. I heard his voice through the deck comms, calm and even. "Vorath Fleet Commander, this is Admiral Colin Rowe of the United Earth Federation. We are not Conclave Compact members. Your compact terms do not apply to this operation. We are conducting a law enforcement action under UEF interstellar jurisdiction. We are here to take custody of Commander Thres of your diplomatic corps and 2 named members of his security detail for legal proceedings related to an assault on a UEF citizen on neutral ground. Present those individuals and we will withdraw. The choice is yours." There was a pause of about 90 seconds. Then the Vorath fleet began to move. I had studied the records. I had read every analysis, every historical account, every tactical comparison that the UEF Research Division had assembled on Vorath military capability. By every conventional metric, they were formidable. Their ships were fast, their weapon systems were well designed, and their commanders were trained in a tradition that stretched back 600 years of compact-governed warfare. Compact-governed. That was the part the documents kept returning to, the part that the analysts kept flagging with small cautionary notes. Compact-governed warfare had rules. Not just the Compact's main prohibition against unprovoked harm, but a whole body of supplementary protocols that had developed over centuries of resolved conflicts. Formal challenges before engagement, designated exchange zones, recognized signals for retreat and ceasefire, a structured escalation ladder that both sides were expected to climb rung by rung, giving each other time to step back at every level. It was, in its own way, a sophisticated and civilized system. The UEF had studied it carefully and identified one fundamental vulnerability. It only worked when both sides were playing the same game. I watched the engagement on the secondary room's tactical display. The Vorath fleet moved in their traditional opening formation, a pattern their commanders had drilled for decades, designed to maximize the effectiveness of the formal challenge phase and give the opposing fleet time to respond according to protocol. It was a good formation. It had worked reliably for 6 centuries. Colin did not issue a formal challenge. Colin did not respond to the Vorath formation at all in the way their training told them to expect. He split the fleet into 3 groups along vectors that the Vorath formation had left open because no compact-trained commander would have considered them valid approach angles. They were not valid under compact protocols. They were perfectly valid under UEF tactical doctrine. The Vorath fleet commander's response, which I heard translated in real time as the engagement developed, had the tincture of someone who has just discovered that the other player does not know the rules and is not interested in being taught. 40 minutes into the engagement, the Vorath flagship took a disabling hit to its propulsion array. Not destroyed, disabled. The distinction was intentional and had been specified in the operational orders as a hard requirement. We were not here to destroy. We were here to stop. The Vorath fleet commander issued a challenge for ritual single combat. It came through the translation channel while I was watching the boarding team prep report on my screen. Colin's response took about 4 seconds. "We are not compact members," his voice said over the channel, the same tone he had used to order breakfast that morning. "We do not conduct ritual combat. We are conducting a law enforcement operation, prepared to receive boarding teams." The secondary engagements lasted another hour. By the time they were over, 5 Vorath vessels had been disabled, and the rest had pulled back to a holding position. There were no destroyed ships on either side. Our damage was significant in 2 cases and minor in the rest. The boarding teams reached the Vorath flagship in the second hour and secured the vessel deck by deck with a precision that I found both impressive and, in a way I could not entirely explain, moving. They had trained for this. They had trained not to be cruel. The operational orders specified that every member of the boarding teams had completed non-lethal restraint certification, that every detained individual was to be processed with full documentation of their physical condition, and that no personal property was to be taken without logging. It was very thorough. It was very careful. Commander Thress was found on the bridge of the flagship, still in his command chair, still with his arms folded. He had not attempted to resist. He had not attempted to flee. I was told later that when the lead boarding officer approached him and read the formal detention notice in translated Vorath, he had been completely silent for nearly a full minute. Then he had said, in a tone that the translator rendered as flat and without effect, "You cannot do this under the compact." The boarding officer had apparently responded very politely that we were aware we were not operating under the compact, and that he was now in UEF custody, and that he would be treated in accordance with UEF detention standards, and would have access to legal representation. Thress had reportedly stared at the officer for a very long time after that. I understood the stare. I understood what was happening inside it. 600 years of a certain kind of certainty, and now something that did not fit. Not an enemy behaving badly. Not a violation of known rules. Something stranger than that. An opponent who existed apparently in a completely different framework, who had a different set of rules, had applied them consistently, and expected them to be respected with the same seriousness that the compact expected its own rules to be respected. It was, I imagined, very disorienting. On the observation deck, 2 hours after the boarding teams returned, Colin Rowe stood next to me and looked out at the stars and the held position of the Vorath fleet and the drift of their disabled flagship. "Casualty report," I said. 11 of ours with injuries, none critical, he said. Vorath side, 23 with injuries of varying severity, none critical. All are receiving medical attention." He paused. "The Vorath fleet commander is asking what happens now. What did you tell him?" "I told him we are returning to neutral space to conduct legal proceedings. I told him the individuals in our custody will receive fair process. I told him that UEF legal counsel has already been assigned, including counsel for the defense." He was quiet for a moment. He did not believe me about the defense counsel. I thought about Thress in his command chair, about the certainty that had been in his face in that corridor 3 weeks ago. The animal stood in my path. "He's going to understand eventually," I said. "Yes," Colin said. "That's the point." He picked up his coffee cup, looked at it, looked at the stars. "Transmit to the conclave," he said. "Tell them we have the individuals in custody, and that legal proceedings will commence on the Connaught within 48 hours. Tell them they are welcome to send observers. All 19 species?" "All 19, he said. "Leave nothing out." I transmitted the message. Then I went to my bunk and lay down and looked at the ceiling, which I was getting very practiced at, and thought about Laura Holt saying it is going to be very, very quiet, and about how quiet it had actually been. In the end, the whole way through. Not one raised voice. Not one declaration, not one moment of theater, just work, just the careful, relentless application of a framework that said, "We have rules, we intend to follow them, and we intend to hold you to them whether you recognize their authority or not." I closed my eyes. Somewhere on this ship, in a secured compartment on the lower decks, Commander Thress was sitting in a standard UEF detention unit that was clean and adequately lit and climate-controlled to a temperature that the intake forms had asked him to specify for his own comfort. He probably did not know we had asked him to specify it. I thought about his face when he found out. The first observer ship arrived 19 hours later, a Keldan diplomatic vessel that emerged from its jump point and immediately began broadcasting a request for docking clearance. It was followed within 6 hours by vessels from 4 other compact species. By the time the proceedings formally opened, observers from 11 of the 19 compact species were present, their ships holding position around the Connaught in a loose cluster that, on the tactical display, looked like an audience gathering, which was exactly what it was. I did not know at the time that what happened over the next 6 days on board this ship would be studied, replicated, argued about, and eventually woven into the foundational documents of 3 different interstellar legal systems. I knew it mattered. I knew it from the way people kept going quiet at key moments, the way the observer delegations leaned forward when certain things were said, the way Colin Rowe watched the room with the measured attention of someone taking permanent notes. The proceedings were held in the Connaught's main assembly bay, which had been reconfigured into something resembling a courtroom. Not a dramatic courtroom, a functional one. Chairs arranged in rows for the observers, a cleared central space, a raised desk for the presiding officer, simple. Clean, everything documented in writing and transmitted to the record in real time. Presiding officer Elena Marsh was 51 years old, a UEF judicial officer with 22 years of service. She had short gray hair, a quiet voice, and the kind of absolute stillness that comes from long practice at the specific skill of being the person in the room who does not react. I sat in the second row of the observer section, off to the side where I could see both the central floor and the faces of the alien delegates. The first thing Elena did was read the charges aloud. Assault on a UEF citizen in the commission of official duties, on neutral ground, captured on recorded footage, witnessed by multiple parties, 3 named individuals. She read each charge in English and then waited while the translation systems rendered it for each observer delegation present. Then she read the rights of the accused. This was the moment the room first changed. She read them calmly and completely. The right to understand the charges, the right to legal counsel, the right to speak in their own defense, the right to a verdict based on evidence, the right to appeal. She read all of it with the same tone she had used for the charges themselves, and as she finished, I watched the Keldan observer delegate, a different counselor from Arvin but with the same large dark eyes, lean slowly to his aide and murmur something. I could not hear it. I did not need to. Because Commander Thress was sitting in the central space with his arms no longer folded, and he was looking at Elena Marsh with an expression I had never seen on a Vorath face before. It was not defiance. It was not contempt. It was the slow, disoriented look of someone trying to process information that does not match the category they put it in. He had been given a defense advocate. His name was Owen Bradley, a UEF legal officer who had spent 3 years before entering service studying alien legal systems and who had, according to his file, specifically requested this assignment. Owen was 34, slightly built, and had the kind of quiet intensity that made him look perpetually as if he was listening to something just below the range of normal hearing. He sat beside Thress and he did his job. That was the thing I kept coming back to. Across 6 days of proceedings, Owen did his job. He challenged evidence submissions. He asked clarifying questions of witnesses, including me, that were sharp and pointed and designed to test the quality of the case against his client. He was not performing. He was not going through motions. He was a good defense advocate, doing good defense work, on behalf of a client who had hit me in a corridor and apparently believed until very recently that he was exempt from consequence. I was called to testify on the second day. I sat in the witness position and Elena asked me questions and I answered them. I described the corridor. I described the sequence of events. I described the impact and the fall and getting up. I described Thress's words, which the translation unit had recorded, and which were submitted to the record verbatim. Owen cross-examined me for 40 minutes. He was trying to establish uncertainty about intent, about context, about the sequence. He was doing his job. I answered his questions as precisely as I had answered Elena's. I did not add anything. I did not editorialize. I described what I had observed and nothing more. At the end of my testimony, I returned to my seat and looked at the observer delegates. 11 species, all of them watching the central floor with varying degrees of visible attention, but all of them watching. In the Vorath section, Thress's two subordinates, the soldiers who had been with him in the corridor, were watching me. They had watched me throughout my testimony. I had not looked away from them then, and I did not look away from them now. The Keldan delegate found me during the midday recess on the fourth day. His name, his aide told me, was Counselor Doroth. He was younger than Arvin, and he moved with a different kind of energy, quicker, weighted down. Corporal Voss, he said. He looked at my face. The mark had largely faded by now, just a faint discoloration along my lower jaw. He seemed to look for it anyway. I have a question. Perhaps it is inappropriate. Go ahead, I said. The individual who defends them, he said. Owen Bradley. He argues for them in good faith. He is genuinely trying to help them. Yes, I said. Doroth was quiet for a moment. Why? I thought about how to answer that. Because if the system only protects people when it's convenient, I said slowly, then it's not a system. It's just power pretending to be a system. Owen is there to make sure the verdict means something. A verdict that comes out of a process where only one side had representation is just the winner saying the winner won. That's not justice. Doroth looked at me for a long time. Your species has a word for this, he said. A specific word. Due process, I said. He repeated it carefully in English, testing the syllables. Due process. He was quiet for another moment. We do not have this concept in the compact framework. I know, I said. It is making several of my colleagues uncomfortable, he said. The idea that even the individual who struck you deserves the full operation of the system. I know, I said again. Does it make you uncomfortable? He asked. I thought about Thress in the corridor, the certainty in his face, the flat ease of animal. I thought about Owen cross-examining me with sharp, careful questions. I thought about Elena Marsh reading the rights of the accused in the same tone she used for everything else. A little, I said honestly, but I'd be more uncomfortable if we didn't. The verdict came on the sixth day. Elena read it in the same measured voice she used for everything. Guilty on all charges, all three individuals. The sentences were custodial. Time to be served in a UEF-administered facility with a full rehabilitation and education program. The sentences were not short, but they were survivable. They were designed to be. Thress received the verdict in silence. His two subordinates looked at each other once, and then looked at the floor. Elena then read a secondary notation into the record, a formal finding that the assault had been conducted in the context of a deliberate determination by the Vorath Confederation's diplomatic command that humans were not covered by the compact sapience classification. This finding, she noted, had implications for the individuals who had authorized and enabled that determination, and those implications were being forwarded to the appropriate UEF governmental bodies for consideration of further action. This was the moment the Vorath observer attaché, who had been sent to the proceedings after Thress was detained, rose to his feet. This is without honor, he said, and his voice through my translation unit had an edge I had not heard from a Vorath before. Not contempt, something closer to hurt. You defeated us in engagement. You could have simply exacted a proportional response. Instead, you built this. He gestured at the room, at Elena, at Owen, at the careful documented record of 6 days, this cage, these rules. You caged them with rules instead of strength. There was silence in the room. I was not supposed to speak. I was in the observer section. I was a junior officer who had already given testimony and had no procedural role in the remainder. I leaned forward and spoke into the microphone at the observer station. Elena looked at me. I had not asked permission, but she did not stop me. We gave them lawyers, I said. We gave them 6 days to present every piece of evidence in their favor. We gave them a verdict that they could understand and a sentence they can survive. I paused. Your compact has been operating for 600 years. In all of that time, does your framework give the person you have charged the same protection it gives the person who was harmed? The Vorath attaché stared at me. Because ours does, I said. That is not a cage. That is what the word system means. The room was silent for a moment that lasted long enough to become a different kind of silence than the kind before. Then Counselor Doroth, from the Keldan section, began to speak, not loudly, but clearly. He spoke for 3 minutes in his own language, and I caught none of it except the last 3 words which he said in English, looking at me. Due process, he said. He said it as if he were naming something he had always needed, but never had a name for. 3 months and 11 days after the proceedings concluded, the invitation arrived. Laura Holt brought it to me herself. She came to my office on Earth Station 1, which had previously been a supply room that someone had put a desk in and optimistically labeled an office, and she sat in the single visitor chair across from my considerably less impressive desk and put a printed document between us. It was on conclave stationery. The seal at the top was the joined emblem of all 19 member species, which I had seen many times but which still produced a small specific feeling somewhere in my chest when I looked at it. Below the seal, in translated English, was a formal invitation for the United Earth Federation, To begin the accession process for full membership in the conclave of 19 worlds. I read it twice. Then I looked up at Laura. She had not changed much since the station. She was wearing a different jacket. She was drinking coffee she had brought herself. She looked, if anything, rested. "When did this come?" I asked. "This morning," she said. "Have you already read it?" "Several times. Are we going to accept it?" She turned the cup in her hand slowly. "That's what I wanted to ask you," she said. I looked at her. "That's not actually a question for a corporal." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She was quiet for a moment. "But I'm asking anyway." I looked at the document, the seal, the careful formal language. 19 species, 600 years. One sacred rule that had just been bent and shaken and examined from more angles than it had been in its entire history. All because one of their member species had decided that something too small to matter had crossed into a corridor at the wrong time. "We should accept," I said, "but not without conditions." Laura's mouth curved slightly. "The Secretary General said almost exactly that," she said. Almost word for word. "What conditions is she pushing for?" 17 amendments to the Compact Charter, Laura said. Due process provisions. A defined and inclusive standard for sapience classification. Protection for non-member species on neutral ground. The right of any species, member or not, to invoke the Compact's protections in the case of unprovoked harm. I sat back in my chair. The conclave is going to argue every one of those. Yes. Are we going to hold firm? Every single point, Laura said. I thought about Doroth on the Connaught saying due process, the way you say the name of something you have been looking for. I thought about Arvin on the station, afraid, genuinely afraid, asking help me understand what is happening here. I thought about Owen Bradley cross-examining me for 40 minutes with absolute professional commitment to a client who had put me on the floor of a corridor. There are going to be compact species that push back hard, I said. Some yes, Laura agreed. The Vorath, obviously. 2 or 3 others who have historically benefited from the current classification standards. She paused. And 11 who have already signaled private support for at least a portion of the amendments. 11. That was more than half. That was, I realized, exactly the number of species who had sent observer ships to the Connaught proceedings. Doroth, I said. He has been very busy these past 3 months, Laura said, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost like pride. He presented a formal position paper to the conclave 2 weeks ago, 40 pages, built largely around the proceedings record. She paused. He cited your testimony, specifically the part about the cage. I was quiet for a moment. What exactly does he cite? I asked. The section where you explained why giving the accused the same protections as the victim makes the verdict mean something. She set down her coffee cup. He argues that the Compact has produced 600 years of peace, but that peace built on incomplete justice is fragile in ways that are not visible until something breaks it. He says the Vorath incident did not break the Compact. He says it revealed a crack that has been there since the beginning. I thought about that. Is he right? I asked. I think so, she said simply. Outside my small window there was the standard view of station exterior, which meant metal and dark and the distant suggestion of stars. I looked at it for a while. Ambassador, I said, Mara, when the Secretary General presents the amendments, when the conclave debates them, is it going to work? She thought about this honestly, the way she thought about most things, which was to give the question its full weight before she answered. Not all 17, she said. Not on the first round. Possibly not in the first year. These things take time and the Compact's legislative process is slow by design. She paused. But the conversation is different now. Before the incident, before the proceedings, before Doroth's paper, humans were observers. Friendly, harmless. Slightly curious observers from a young species that had not yet done anything interesting enough to demand serious attention. And now, I said, now we are the species that captured a Vorath commander, gave him defense counsel, tried him fairly, sentenced him proportionally, and then showed up with 17 proposed improvements to a 600-year-old legal system. She picked up her coffee again. That is a different kind of attention, I laughed. It surprised me. It was a short, genuine laugh. They must hate us, I said. Some of them, she said. Some of them are fascinated. Arvin has requested a full briefing on the history of human legal development going back 3,000 years. He told me last week he is writing a comparative study. He said it will probably be several volumes. I smiled. My lip had healed completely by then. The mark was gone, but I remembered exactly where it had been. The way you remember the shape of something important, even after the thing itself has faded. The formal accession ceremony was held on the conclave station 6 months later. I stood in the main hall in my dress uniform, with 100 other UEF personnel, and watched Laura Holt sign the amended membership charter with a pen she had brought from Earth. The pen was simple. She had said in the briefing before the ceremony that using a fancy pen seemed like the wrong note. The point was the signature, not the instrument. The Compact was now the Compact of 20 worlds. The 17 amendments had been negotiated down to 14, with the remaining 3 tabled for further discussion over the following year. 11 of the 14 had passed with strong support. The Sapiens Classification Amendment had passed by exactly 2 votes, and the margin had mattered, and the vote had gone on for 6 hours before the final tally. I stood in the hall and watched the emblem update on the screen at the front of the room. 19 joined seals, and then the image shifted and a 20th appeared, the UEF emblem, blue and gold, settling into the circle alongside the others. Counselor Dorith was standing near the front of the hall. When the emblem updated, he turned and found me in the crowd with his large dark eyes, which was an impressive piece of navigation across a very crowded room. He raised one of his 4 hands in a brief acknowledging gesture. I raised mine back. Commander Thress was not at the ceremony. He was serving his sentence in a UEF facility on the outer ring, in a section that had been designed with Vorath environmental requirements in mind. I had received a report 6 weeks earlier, not addressed to me specifically but forwarded through Colin Rowe's office, that noted Thress had begun participating in the facility's education program. The report did not say what subject he was studying. I found out later it was UEF legal history. I thought about that a great deal on the morning of the ceremony, about what it means to be genuinely surprised by a framework, about the particular education that comes from being inside a system rather than outside it, from being given rights rather than denied them, from being treated as someone whose fate mattered to the process, even when the process was working against you. It was not a comfortable education, but discomfort was not the same thing as cruelty, and the difference between those 2 things was, I had come to believe, one of the most important differences in the universe. After the ceremony, Laura found me near the entrance to the main hall. She had the signed charter in a case under her arm. She looked the same as she always looked, calm and slightly amused by the world, as if things were generally going according to a plan she had made a long time ago, and had not yet felt the need to revise. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about the question. I thought about 11 months of watching something unfold that had started in a corridor with a blow that was meant to tell me I did not exist in any way that mattered. I thought about the security cameras, about the silence in the room after Thress's words came through translation, about Owen Bradley's 40 minutes of cross-examination, about Dorith saying due process the way you say the name of a long missing thing. Like we did the right thing, I said, in the right way. Laura nodded once. That was the whole point, she said. She moved off through the crowd to speak with someone. I stood by the entrance and looked at the hall and the 100 species and the 20 seals on the screen and thought about how something enormous had happened because one person had decided to get up off the floor and say, nothing, just get up. Just let the cameras see. Sometimes the most powerful move is the one that requires the most patience, the one that waits, the one that does not rush toward reaction but instead creates a space that fills itself with consequence. I thought, they hit one of us because they thought we were nothing. I thought, we turned that into this. I touched the spot on my jaw where the mark had been, just for a second the way Laura had told me Dorith had described it in his paper, a small gesture of acknowledgement, not resentment, not grief, something more like recognition. Then I let my hand drop and I walked forward into the room, and there was a great deal of work still to do.